Tyquan Thornton, the next Patriots wide receiver bust, or is he a hidden gem of the draft? We're here to break it down with a special guest starting right now on Razzball Fantasy. Hey folks, welcome back to the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Lamarco, and today, believe it or not, we have a special guest coming in. One of the best NFL mock drafters in the industry, Matthew Jones. Matthew, what's going on, man?
Nothing much. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So, obviously, before we dive into today, we're going to talk about a specific player in Tyquan Thornton. Before we do all that, I want to make sure everyone's following Razzball Fantasy across the board on YouTube and also on TikTok and Instagram at Razzball Fantasy. And make sure you're going to razzball.com to check out all the latest articles from all our great writers on every platform for baseball, football, hockey, and more. Now, let's not bury the lead. We're here to talk today a little bit with you, Matthew, about Tyquan Thornton. But before we do that, I kind of wanted to get your thoughts in general about the draft. So can you talk to us a little bit about maybe what the biggest surprise for you was in the first maybe round?
Well, obviously, even if you have put together a good mock draft, there's going to be a lot of surprises, and the magnitude of the surprise may vary. So you might have, two or three guys, you're pretty sure one of those will be the pick. And then for other picks, it's someone that, you could have had 5 guesses and you never would have picked. So I'd say I was a little bit surprised in the top 10. I was a little bit surprised to see Kayvon Thibodeau go into the Giants, just because it seemed like maybe the combine interview was a little bit weird. And I feel like Wink Martindale usually generates his pressure from the scheme a lot of times. So I didn't know that he would necessarily look for someone who would necessarily be just winning one-on-one matchups. I thought, they might have maybe targeted someone more along the lines of George Karlaftis, and maybe not that high, but, at another point. Charles Cross of the Seahawks, I thought was pretty surprising just because, they're a team that has a very idiosyncratic draft style. They make some unusual picks and they have a kind of a different board than other teams. And they really seem to, go all in on like the physical run-based offensive identity. So, drafting a kind of a pure left tackle from a air raid style, I know that was a popular pick before the draft happened, but once it occurred, I think it seemed a little bit surprising because I thought they might try and establish the run more, go with a more physical guy like a Trevor Penning or something like that. And there's also a player who I believe was the focus of a previous Razzball show, which was Jahan Dotson to Washington. And I actually didn't have him in the first round of my final mock draft. And I did think there was a chance he would come in the first round, but I couldn't really find the right fit. And just based on what I know of Scott Turner's offense, I thought he might have targeted like a bigger and, more of a vertical deep threat kind of receiver because, that's been a key part of the Air Coryell offense has been getting like a Vincent Jackson, kind of guy. So I didn't really know that Dotson totally fit with the other receivers on the roster just because you've got Curtis Samuel playing in the slot. You've got Terry McLaurin, as the flanker. I feel like there's some overlap between the skill sets that has made me kind of surprised to see that one.
Okay. So, based on everything you saw too in the first and second rounds, was there any picks that you kind of like, okay, that I saw that come from a mile away, maybe outside the first, maybe second picks?
I really thought that the Giants were going to draft Evan Neal just because, Brian Daboll has a connection back at Alabama, having previously, coordinated the offense there. So I felt like they probably, had a better feel for him than maybe Ike Ekwonu or Charles Cross. And, I thought Andrew Thomas played so well at left tackle last year. They're going to look for a right tackle. And, Neal was the guy who had the right tackle experience before. So I figured he would be kind of a plug and play guy that they could really trust. Whereas Charles Cross, you're flipping someone over. He's coming from maybe not the most pro style offensive scheme. There's going to be some footwork differences and things like that. So I didn't really buy that. There were some late rumors that Evan Neal had some medical issues, and I think those ended up being debunked. But, that would have been really the only cause for concern. And maybe a second guy, maybe a Chris Olave going to the Saints. I felt like that was pretty likely. in part because I didn't think other receivers would be left at that time. So I know it's kind of there weren't many choices. I know that Olave and Michael Thomas have a kind of a bit of a mentor relationship. And, if you look at some of the Saints' previous receivers, they've usually had one bigger kind of possession guy. And then the other receiver has been kind of more like a lankier, speedier guy. So they've had Marcus Colston, and then opposite him would be like Devery Henderson or Ted Ginn or, someone like that. So I kind of felt like Chris Olave complimented him better than like a Drake London would have, or, someone like that.
Okay. All right. Listen, we bet this is great insight by you, but this is interesting because today's show, you actually picked the player we're going to talk about today. And I find it extremely interesting. So the player we're talking about is Tyquan Thornton of the New England Patriots. Now, the Patriots haven't had the best luck in drafts with wide receivers. So do you feel that the Patriots have picked another bust, or do you feel that this is finally the time where they found the gem that they've been looking for years?
Well, the Patriots, obviously, they have their own draft board. They don't subscribe to the draft service that a lot of the other teams use. So, they try and get their information totally independently. And that's how I feel like it comes to be, that where they're valuing people looks way different than where other teams are valuing them. And so in this case, I did, looking into Thornton, I mean, we can get into the details a little bit, but I did think there was more to his game, and he had more, nuance and, better route running skills than I was anticipating. But at the same time, it did seem a little bit early, especially what made me nervous is the fact that right after him, you saw 3 receivers within the next 4 picks. I think Cam Jurgens went to the Eagles, and then you saw the Steelers draft George Pickens. You saw I believe the Colts drafting Alec Pierce, and then the Chiefs took Sky Moore. And those are some teams who are pretty good at identifying receiver talent. So, those are the players he's going to be compared to down the road. And, based on the track records, it's a little bit worrisome, but I do think there are some good strengths to his game that, might make him, a pretty good contributor.
Okay, so for player profiler, I just like to look at the stats. I mean, this guy has a 100th percentile speed score based on his size and his 40-yard dash, and that's something that jumps out at you right away, and those will usually get you jump maybe even a round and 2 sooner you would normally get in draft if you're talking 100th percentile speed. But his comparables are interesting because they are very hit or miss. So their comparables on the site are Robbie Anderson, Jerome Simpson, who had his brief moment with the Cincinnati Bengals, but he wasn't really that productive. And then Nate Burleson, who had his moments as well. Is there any of those comps that you think, okay, that makes a little sense? Or is there another player you had in mind for his player comp in the NFL?
I don't really see the Nate Burleson comp. I do think that maybe the first one that you mentioned, Robbie Anderson, would have been a good comparison just because they're both kind of lanky guys. And actually, the Patriots were kind of kicking the tires on Robbie Anderson a little bit before the draft. So they might have kind of seen Tyquan Thornton as offering that same sort of skill set. And prior to the draft, the new director of player personnel, Matt Groh, he was really talking about trying to add speed to the team, and that really seemed like a big priority with all the picks. So, I think maybe they kind of looked at what Anderson would cost to bring in, and maybe they thought it's a little bit too much, or they couldn't, fit it under the cap or whatever. And then they kind of wanted to get a similar skill set. So they looked at Thornton.
Okay. So now when you're looking at the Patriots receiving core, they do have a lot of quality players. They don't have many elite players. They're like Devontae Parker, they just brought in. He technically has 0 dead cap after 2023. You also have Jacoby Myers, who has been very productive as an undrafted free agent. He's actually a free agent after this season. Then you have guys like Kendrick Bourne, Nelson Aguilar, and then you have the tight ends, Hunter Henry. A lot of these guys will actually be free agents 2023. So my question for you is, for fantasy people out there, do you see this kid potentially taking one of their jobs, or is he going to be probably more of a dynasty 2023 and beyond type player?
So I don't really see him as a direct replacement for Jacoby Myers or Kendrick Bourne. And that's because those guys kind of play inside and outside, and especially Jacoby Myers does a lot of work from the slot. If you look at Tyquan Thornton's metrics last year, I think he only caught like 1 pass as a slot receiver. So, he's kind of a tall and lanky guy. He usually pretty much was just played a straight up split end last year and totally an outside receiver. So one thing I could imagine is if they decide to move on from Nelson Aguilar, if they decided to try and get some cap savings or something, then he would probably be bumped up to the 4th receiver on the depth chart this year. But he would basically be the second choice for the split end, because I'm imagining that N'Keal Harry is either going to be, sent out on like a late round pick swap, or he's going to get cut.
Mm-hmm.
And so he'll basically be behind Devontae Parker. And obviously Parker's going to probably end up being one of the top 3 receivers on the depth chart with Myers and Bourne. But I think he only played in like 10 games last year. So if he ends up getting hurt, then you might see Thornton, get some more playing time earlier on.
Okay, so now there's a long history of Baylor receivers going in these day 2, day 3 area, like early day 3, and not a lot of big names jump out. Maybe Josh Gordon had a couple of seasons, but a lot of guys haven't really hit. So what do you think makes Thornton from the rest of the Baylor receivers? Is his route running that stood out to you? What else would make him maybe translate better than those other guys?
Well, I don't think necessarily we can do a direct comparison of Baylor receivers just because they've changed offensive coordinators and, schemes so many times. So obviously Art Briles was like kind of the prototypical Baylor coach, but then they had Matt Rule, obviously 2017 to 2019. And that's when Denzel Mims came out. And then they had Larry Fedora last year, 2020. And then this past year, I believe Jeff Grimes was the offensive coordinator. So they've been shuffling the offense a little bit. It's been a little bit different. What I think the Patriots liked about Thornton that kind of maybe they, caused them to consider him is that he was coached by Chauncey Stuckey, the wide receivers coach last year, who he spent his whole career in the NFL playing in basically the Earhart-Perkins offense, the Patriot-style offense in Cleveland with Eric Mangini and everything. So I think maybe some of the concepts and some of the coaching and some of the technique might overlap with what the Patriots do. And, you can see, like, there's some nuance to his routes on tape. It's not on every snap that, sometimes he'll have trouble stacking people or something. But at the same time, you do see like some pretty good footwork. You'll see him getting on the toes of defensive backs. You'll see him leaning into, defenders before the breaks and everything. There is some level of, technique to his game. You don't see it on every play, but I do think that there are some pro style things on the tape as well.
So let's talk a little bit about, like, you're talking to like your buddies and you're saying, hey, we got to talk about dynasty football. And right now today he's going around like 29th overall in rookie drafts. He's going around players like Calvin Austin. He's going around some quarterbacks like Matt Corral, Desmond Ridder. There's Davis Price from the running back for the Washington Commanders. I guess my question comes like, how high are you on this kid? Are you willing to take him above guys like Alex Pierce, maybe a Trey McBride, maybe a Wan'Dale Robinson? Or are you taking all those receivers over him in a draft for like dynasty football?
Mm-hmm. So I think if we were just grading the player, I think there is a case to be made that he would be maybe a little bit better than like a Calvin Austin. But at the same time, just the way that the Patriots set the offensive game plans, they're often adjusting, and it's pretty hard to predict, which players are going to get touches on a week-to-week basis. So the fact that he's not like the slot guy kind of makes me worried about how consistent his output's going to be. And like, I know some leagues have kick return points, for return specialists and everything. And he didn't really do that either. So I feel like he's going to be like the wide receiver equivalent of like a touchdown vulture running back, where like, he might make a big play that gets you enough points, but at the same time, I wouldn't really count on him getting like a heavy volume. And he wasn't exactly a volume receiver in college either, so he was the obviously lead receiver this past year. But, 2020 got hurt and missed a few games. He ended up falling behind a few other guys on the depth chart. 2019, he was opposite Denzel Mims, who was obviously the main guy. So I don't know that you could count on I wouldn't necessarily count on him in like a PPR league or anything, but I do think that he could end up making a few big plays that would, possibly, warrant, putting him in the lineup down the road.
He might sound like kind of like a best ball format kind of guy. You target late because he gets you those big weeks, and when he doesn't produce, he doesn't bother you or hit you. So, all right, well, that's pretty much it, man. Matt, I really appreciate your time today. honestly, this was great information. But before we go, please tell the Razzball followers where they can find your content and what do you have coming up in the next few months with content overall?
Okay, so my website is called Draft Examiner. It's just draftexaminer.com. And these days, I'm just starting to kind of look back through my notes and see if there's anything I missed that led to players being drafted by specific teams. And I'm just starting to do some basic research into some of the top guys for 2023. So recently, I've been looking at some of the quarterbacks, but I'll probably branch out to a different position pretty soon and just try and get some early notes. Then I can kind of compare those to what I write closer to the draft. So we'll see how it developed over the year.
Well, Matthew, I mean, really, this was fantastic stuff. And listen, people, I'm not joking. This is the #1 mock drafter over the last 5 years, according to our report. So Matthew Jones is someone that you want to go follow. Go check out the draftexaminer.com. And hopefully we'll get him back on the show soon. Matthew, this was great content. Once again, make sure you're following us across the board at Razzball Fantasy on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and also go to razzball.com to check out all the latest information we have on football, baseball, basketball, more. I'm your host, Bobby Lamarco. That's Matthew Jones, and we're out of here, folks.